Before frozen dinners and fast food chains, there was ingenuity. In kitchens warmed by wood stoves and hearts hardened by survival, Americans crafted meals out of almost nothing. But these weren't just recipes, they were resilience on a plate. In the next part of this journey, we'll uncover even more forgotten wartime dishes, Depression-era creations, and old cookbook miracles that helped entire families make it through the toughest times. Some may sound strange, some surprisingly delicious, but all are rich with stories. So grab a seat, maybe a warm drink, because what's coming next will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about old American food. War Garden Cabbage, the backyard hero of the home front. Back in the dark days of World War I and again during World War II, front yards across America transformed into something far more vital than a place to relax. They became victory gardens. And no vegetable played a greater role in those patriotic plots than humble cabbage. This was the era when families weren't just encouraged to do their bit, they were told to grow it, too. War garden cabbage became a staple on the dinner table, not just because it was easy to grow, but because it was hearty, nutritious, and endlessly adaptable. Whether stewed, boiled, fried, or fermented, cabbage stepped up when meat was rationed and canned goods were scarce. In old pamphlets distributed by the U.S. Food Administration, cabbage was even called the soldier's standby at home. Recipes included simple cabbage sautéed in drippings with onions, or boiled with a pinch of salt and vinegar to keep it bright and tangy. But the most iconic? A humble cabbage stew made with whatever scraps were available: potatoes, carrots, a spoonful of bacon grease if you were lucky, simmered slowly until the flavors melded into something warm, filling, and shockingly good. To modern palates, it might sound plain. But to wartime families, it meant survival. It meant stretching meals, feeding children, and saving every penny. Today, War Garden Cabbage is a symbol of thrift, patriotism, and the power of homegrown resilience. It's one of those dishes you don't just taste, you remember. Because behind every bite is the story of a family that refused to give in to hunger, and a nation that learned how to feed itself from the ground up. Sunshine Salad Redux, when Jell-O tried to save the nation again. Just when you thought Jell-O couldn't go any further, it came back for a second act. Sunshine Salad Redux wasn't just a repeat, it was a revival of hope in a bowl. During the 1940s, as the war dragged on and rationing tightened its grip, American homemakers faced the daily challenge of creating meals that were filling, cheerful, and resourceful. So, they turned back to a favorite from earlier wartime cookbooks, the Sunshine Salad. Only this time, it had to shine even brighter, with less. This updated version often started with lemon or orange-flavored gelatin, the most accessible flavors at the time. Canned pineapple bits and shredded carrots gave it that signature sunbeam look. But here's where things took a Depression-era twist: cabbage. Yes, finely shredded cabbage was added for crunch, texture, and to stretch the salad into more servings without extra cost. This wasn't just about taste, it was about symbolism. The salad's golden hue represented optimism, a glimmer of happiness on the family table, even when meat was scarce and fresh produce limited. Housewives layered it into jelly molds or packed it into glass dishes, sometimes adding vinegar to sharpen the flavor or grated apple to soften the cabbage bite. Kids didn't always love it, but mothers loved that it was affordable, pretty, and felt just a little bit fancy. When served chilled on a hot summer day with saltine crackers or a spoonful of mayonnaise, it felt like a party, even if no one could afford cake. Sunshine Salad Redux reminds us of the lengths families went to preserve joy during the darkest times. It may not be trending today, but in its day, this strange, glistening tower of hope gave people something to smile about. Potato candy balls, sweetness from scraps. In the throes of the Great Depression and wartime rationing, sweets were scarce, and creativity became the kitchen's most vital ingredient. That's where potato candy balls rolled onto the scene: unexpected, odd, and absolutely unforgettable. Imagine this: a boiled russet potato, cooled and mashed until silky smooth, not to serve with meat, but to become dessert. Into that starchy mash, home cooks folded powdered sugar, a lot of it. The mixture transformed into a pliable dough, surprisingly sweet despite the humble start. And from that dough, magic was made. This wasn't a dish for the rich. It was for children who hadn't seen a candy store in months. Mothers would flatten the dough like a pie crust, then spread on a thin layer of peanut butter. Rolled tightly and sliced into pinwheel shapes, these potato candy spirals were then chilled or shaped into balls, depending on what the family had. No chocolate, no fancy ingredients, just grit and innovation, wrapped in sugar and hope. Some versions even included coconut flakes, crushed nuts, or a dab of vanilla if it was squirreled away in the pantry. But even at its simplest, potato candy balls were treasured, passed between neighbors, served at church socials, or tucked into children's lunch pails like gold coins. Kids didn't know or care that the main ingredient was yesterday's leftover spuds. All they tasted was sweetness, handmade love, and a rare bite of comfort. Today, this recipe feels like a whisper from another era. It reminds us that treats weren't always bought. They were earned, crafted from what little remained and turned into joy. So the next time you mash potatoes, think twice before tossing the leftovers. You might just be a swirl of peanut butter away from reviving a forgotten tradition. Vinegar pie, the desperation dessert that fooled everyone. During the harshest days of the Great Depression, when fruit was scarce and lemons were a luxury, resourceful cooks turned to an unlikely substitute: vinegar. Yes, vinegar. What sounds like a kitchen accident was actually a clever invention born from necessity. This pie didn't start in the 1930s, though. It has roots in pioneer kitchens, when early settlers needed to improvise without citrus. But during the Depression, it became a national phenomenon once again. Housewives needed a way to bring sweetness to the table, to bake something comforting when the cupboards were nearly bare. And so, the vinegar pie re-emerged as a miracle dessert. Made with simple pantry staples: sugar, butter, eggs, flour, and just a spoonful of vinegar, it created a tangy sweet filling that mimicked lemon curd surprisingly well. The vinegar wasn't overpowering, instead, it gave the pie its subtle bite, enhancing the sweetness and thickening the custard. It was a psychological victory, making something out of practically nothing. A flaky crust, a golden, glossy top, and that unexpected flavor had a way of tricking even the sharpest taste buds into thinking this was something more luxurious than it was. Many remember their mothers or grandmothers baking this during rationing, when you had to choose between sugar and soap, flour or fuel. But still, there'd be pie. And this one? It brought smiles, even if the family didn't know how close to empty the shelves had gotten. Today, vinegar pie stands as a testament to ingenuity in the kitchen. It's more than a recipe, it's a slice of survival history, served warm with a dusting of sugar and maybe a dollop of cream, if you were lucky. Because in those days, dessert wasn't just about flavor, it was about hope. Cornmeal mush, the humble dish that built American mornings. Long before boxed cereals and toaster pastries, breakfast on the American frontier often started with one thing: cornmeal mush. It might not sound glamorous, but this humble dish was once the backbone of morning meals in log cabins, farmhouses, and wartime kitchens across the nation. Cornmeal mush dates back to the early settlers and was a staple among Native American tribes long before that. But during the Great Depression and both World Wars, it saw a strong revival, not because it was trendy, but because it was cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable. All it took was water, cornmeal, and a pinch of salt. That was it. Cooked slowly into a thick porridge, it could be served hot for breakfast, then poured into pans, chilled, sliced, and fried for supper. In Appalachian homes and Dust Bowl shacks alike, cornmeal mush meant survival. Families would make big pots of it in the morning, sweetening it with molasses or syrup if they had any, or just eating it plain with milk. Leftovers weren't wasted, they were poured into tin pans, cooled until firm, then sliced and fried crisp and lard for a golden, crunchy crust that turned poverty into pleasure. It wasn't just food, it was a ritual. Stirring the pot, watching it thicken, smelling that warm, earthy corn. It grounded people in the present and reminded them of what mattered: nourishment, resilience, and making the most of what you had. And here's what's wild: many who grew up on cornmeal mush still crave it today. Not because it was fancy, but because it tasted like home. Like grit and grace stirred into one. So if you've never tried it, maybe it's time to taste the dish that fed generations through hardship. Because sometimes, the most forgotten foods are the ones that fed us best. Prune whip, the elegant dessert made from almost nothing. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, dessert didn't disappear, it just evolved. Enter prune whip. A light, airy, almost magical dessert whipped together from the most unlikely ingredient: stewed prunes. Yes, prunes. This forgotten sweet treat was born in an era when eggs were precious, sugar was rationed, and families still wanted something sweet on the table. Housewives got creative, turning humble, shelf-stable ingredients into showstoppers. Prune whip was exactly that. It looked like a soufflé and tasted like dried fruit had gone to finishing school. To make it, cooks would take dried prunes, stew them until soft, then puree them into a smooth, dark mixture. Next came the egg whites, beaten into glossy peaks and gently folded in. A touch of lemon juice added brightness, and sugar, if you had it, sweetened the whole affair. The result? A cloud-like, purple-brown mousse that could be served chilled in delicate teacups or baked into a warm pudding. In 1940s cookbooks, prune whip was considered both healthful and elegant. It appeared in hospital menus and church suppers alike. Prunes were seen as nutritious, and the dessert didn't require butter, milk, or flour, ingredients in short supply. Even better, it felt fancy, offering families a much-needed sense of dignity during trying times. And the taste? Sweet, tangy, slightly chewy, and fluffy at once, a strange but comforting texture that grew on you with every spoonful. It was the kind of dessert your grandmother might have served with a smile, proud of what she could do with almost nothing. Today, prune whip might sound like a joke. But behind the funny name is a dessert that carried people through some of America's hardest years. It proved that even in scarcity, joy could be whipped up light, sweet, and unforgettable. Cabbage pudding, when survival tasted like Sunday dinner. Cabbage. Cheap, filling, and during the toughest decades in American history, practically a household hero. But while we've boiled it, stuffed it, and fried it, one forgotten recipe turned this humble vegetable into something truly surprising: cabbage pudding. Yes, pudding. This dish dates back to the Great Depression and wartime rationing, when Americans had to stretch every ingredient, but still longed for warmth and familiarity at the dinner table. Cabbage pudding was born from that necessity. It was an attempt to make a comfort food with what little you had, transforming scraps into something that felt like a proper meal. The recipe varied by region and by household. Some used finely shredded cabbage mixed with breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, and a little milk if you were lucky enough to have any. Others folded in minced onion, herbs, and leftover bacon fat to add flavor. Then it was all poured into a buttered dish, baked until golden on top and tender inside. What emerged was a savory, custardy casserole that smelled like a country farmhouse and tasted like survival dressed in Sunday best. For immigrant families, especially in Eastern European and Appalachian communities, cabbage pudding wasn't just resourceful, it was rooted in tradition. Similar recipes existed in Polish and Hungarian kitchens, brought to America by working-class families who knew how to make cabbage taste like comfort. It might not have been glamorous, but it filled stomachs and lifted spirits. And more than that, it symbolized pride and thrift, in creativity, in feeding a family against all odds. We've forgotten just how many ways cabbage saved the day. But cabbage pudding? That was the dish that whispered, "We'll make it through," even as pantries ran bare. So next time you look at a head of cabbage and think, just soup? Remember the families who turned it into a pudding and served resilience by the slice. Vinegar pie, the dessert born from desperation. Imagine craving something sweet during a time when sugar was scarce, lemons were a luxury, and even fruit preserves were a far-off dream. Now enter vinegar pie, one of the most surprising and resourceful desserts to come out of American hardship. This odd-sounding dessert became a staple during the Great Depression and Civil War era, when pantry staples were limited, but the desire for a slice of pie still remained strong. Women, especially rural homemakers and pioneer wives, crafted this ingenious recipe by swapping out lemons for common pantry vinegar to mimic the tartness needed in a custard filling. The recipe was simple, but its impact was huge. It started with a basic pie crust, usually lard-based, filled with a mixture of water, a splash of apple cider or white vinegar, a bit of flour for thickening, sugar if available, and butter to give it richness. Some even added nutmeg or cinnamon for warmth. Once baked, it set into a soft, slightly tangy, custard-like filling. The result? A pie that tasted surprisingly like lemon, with a bright flavor that defied its humble ingredients. To those who grew up on it, vinegar pie wasn't a joke, it was Sunday dessert. It was birthdays during rationing. It was love and effort when there was little else to give. This dessert quietly traveled across generations in Southern and Appalachian households, passed down in handwritten cookbooks and family stories. It's one of those dishes that makes you stop and marvel, how could something so modest, born from desperation, feel so comforting? Today, it's mostly forgotten. But those who do remember know it as a sweet reminder of resilience. A time when American kitchens didn't need abundance to serve dignity and flavor by the slice. So next time you hear vinegar pie, don't laugh. Respect it. Taste it. And remember the kitchens it once came from. Peanut butter stuffed onions, the war-era side dish no one talks about. Yes, you read that right. Peanut butter. Inside onions. A combination so odd, it sounds like culinary sabotage until you realize it's a real recipe from America's most trying times. This strange yet strangely effective dish dates back to the World War I and II rationing eras, when Americans were encouraged to stretch the meal, waste nothing, and make do. In military cookbooks and wartime homemaker pamphlets, this recipe emerged not as a joke, but as a legitimate and protein-rich side dish that checked all the boxes: filling, cheap, and meatless. Here's how it worked. Large yellow onions were boiled until tender, then scooped out from the center, creating natural little bowls. The filling? A mixture of peanut butter, breadcrumbs, onion pulp, sometimes powdered milk or egg substitute, and salt. Some recipes even called for a dab of mustard or a splash of vinegar to cut the richness. Once stuffed, the onions were baked until soft and slightly caramelized. The peanut butter would melt just enough to bind everything together, turning the center creamy and savory, while the onion shell provided a sweet, mellow contrast. Believe it or not, it was considered nutritious and, according to some wartime families, downright comforting. Peanut butter was prized for its high protein, long shelf life, and affordability. Onions were hardy, easy to grow, and always available in backyard gardens. Together, they symbolized what wartime cooking was all about: ingenuity under pressure. You won't find this dish in diners or cookbooks anymore. It vanished with the end of ration stamps and the return of meat to the dinner table. But for some veterans and homefront kids of the 1940s, it was the taste of sacrifice and survival. In a time when every scrap mattered, this unlikely pairing fed both bellies and spirits. One humble, protein-packed bite at a time. And there you have it, a dish so forgotten, even history blinked. If these stories of survival and flavor stir something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Because the next forgotten recipe might just surprise you even more.